The cargo hauler Stellar Drifter hummed through the Kepler asteroid belt, its hull occasionally scraping against floating debris that the deflector shields couldn't push aside. In the ship's compact engine room, Marcus wiped grease from his hands while fine-tuning the plasma converters. The soft blue glow of the engine core cast shadows across his weathered face, highlighting the concentration in his dark eyes. "Marcus, are you nearly finished down there?" The voice carried a melodic accent that still made him pause after 6 months of working together. Zephyra's tone held that particular mixture of impatience and amusement that meant she was bored at the controls. "Give me 5 more minutes," he called back, adjusting a coupling that had been vibrating off frequency. "Unless you want us to drift dead in space when this converter gives out. Your human efficiency never ceases to amaze me," came her reply, dripping with playful sarcasm. Marcus grinned despite himself. Working with Zephyra had been an education in more ways than one. The Valerian pilot possessed skills that made their dangerous cargo runs through disputed space seem almost routine. But she also had a talent for getting under his skin with her casual observations about human nature. 20 minutes later, he climbed the narrow ladder to the cockpit, engine diagnostics pad in hand. Zephyra sat in the pilot's chair, her long legs stretched out as she monitored their course through the asteroid field. Her skin held that distinctive Valerian iridescence, shifting from deep blue to purple, depending on the angle of the light. Crystalline hair, almost transparent, but shot through with veins of silver, cascaded down her back in intricate braids that seemed to move with a life of their own. "Engines are running at optimal efficiency," Marcus reported, settling into the co-pilot's seat. "We should reach the Helix station right on schedule." "Excellent," Zephyra said, then turned to study him with those large, luminous eyes that held flecks of gold. "Tell me something, Marcus. In all my travels, I've noticed human names are so predictable." "Predictable?" He raised an eyebrow, settling back in his chair. "How so?" "Marcus, David, Stephen, Jennifer, Michelle," she counted off on her fingers. "Always the same patterns, the same sounds. So limited in their scope." She gestured toward the viewport, where stars glittered beyond the drifting rocks. "Among my people, names are symphonies. They tell stories of the moment we're born, the celestial alignments, the hopes our parents carry for us." Marcus found himself genuinely curious despite her teasing tone. "What's your real name, then?" "I've only heard you called Zephyra." Her expression shifted, becoming almost secretive. "Zephyra is what I use for dealing with other species. My true birth song name, ... double quotes." She paused, gazing out at the stars. "It contains the harmonic resonance of 3 binary pulsars that were in alignment when I took my first breath. The crystalline formations in the caves where I was born. The promise of wind across the methane seas of my homeworld." "That sounds beautiful," Marcus said, and meant it. "It is," she agreed, then turned back to him with a mischievous gleam in her eyes. "In fact, according to our oldest traditions, if any being from another species could correctly pronounce a Valerian's true birth song name, they would be bound as life partners under ancient law." Marcus laughed. "Seriously?" "Completely serious," Zephyra said, though her tone remained playful. "Of course, it's impossible. The harmonic complexities require vocal structures that other species simply don't possess. It's never actually happened in recorded history, so it's safe for you to joke about it." "Exactly." She leaned back in her chair, clearly enjoying herself. "I could tell you my true name right now, and you couldn't even come close to pronouncing it properly." Something in her confident assumption sparked a memory in Marcus. Years of training, of immersing himself in alien cultures and languages, of modifications he'd undergone for a life he'd left behind. He studied Zephyra's face, noting the way she held herself with casual certainty. "What if I could?" he asked quietly. "Could what?" "Pronounce your name?" Zephyra laughed, a sound like crystal chimes in a gentle breeze. "Marcus, you're sweet, but it's physically impossible for human vocal cords to—" "Try me." Something in his tone made her pause. She searched his face, looking for signs of jest, but found only quiet seriousness. "You're not joking, are you?" "Not even a little." For a long moment they stared at each other. The only sounds were the gentle hum of the engines and the occasional ping of small debris against the hull. Zephyra's confidence seemed to waver slightly. "If you're serious about this," she said slowly, "you should understand what you're asking. Our binding laws are sacred. They're not just tradition. They're considered spiritually binding contracts that tie two souls together." "I understand," Marcus said, though his heart had begun beating faster. "Tell me your name, Zephira." She studied him for another moment, then straightened in her chair. When she spoke, her voice took on a formal, ceremonial quality. "My true birth song name is ... and then she sang it. The sound that emerged from her throat was unlike anything Marcus had ever heard from humanoid vocal cords. It was layered, harmonic, containing frequencies that seemed to resonate through his bones. It rose and fell in complex patterns, weaving together notes that spoke of cosmic forces and ancient promises. It was beautiful and alien, and completely impossible for any human to reproduce. When the last note faded, Zephira sat back with a satisfied smile. "There, now you know why it's called impossible." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, processing not just the beauty of what he'd heard, but the memories it had triggered. The years of study, the surgical modifications to his vocal cords and hearing, the price he'd paid to understand languages that weren't meant for human mouths. Then, without warning, he opened his mouth and sang her name back to her. The melody that emerged was perfect. Every harmonic, every tonal shift, every subtle frequency modulation reproduced with absolute precision. It was her name, sung as purely as if another Valerian had spoken it. Zephira's eyes went wide. The iridescence of her skin shifted rapidly from blue to deep purple to something approaching violet. Her mouth opened in shock, and for the first time since he'd known her, she seemed completely speechless. "How?" she whispered finally. "How is that possible?" Marcus felt a mix of emotion, satisfaction at surprising her, anxiety about what he'd just revealed about himself, and something deeper that he wasn't ready to examine. "It's a long story," he said quietly. "We have time," Zephira said, her voice still hushed with wonder. "Marcus, do you understand what you just did? What this means according to my people's laws?" He nodded slowly. "I think I do." The cargo hauler continued its path through the asteroid field, but something fundamental had changed in the small cockpit. The casual working relationship between pilot and mechanic had just become something far more complicated, binding them together in ways neither had anticipated when their shift began. Outside, the stars continued their ancient dance, indifferent to the lives of those who traveled between them. But for Marcus and Zephira, the universe had just become a much smaller, much more intimate place. The silence stretched between them for what felt like an eternity. Zephira stared at Marcus as if seeing him for the first time, her luminous eyes searching his face for answers he wasn't sure he was ready to give. "Marcus," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, "you need to explain." "Now." Before he could respond, the ship's proximity alarms began blaring. Red warning lights bathed the cockpit as Zephira spun back to her controls, her fingers dancing across the navigation display. "Asteroid storm incoming," she announced, all personal questions temporarily forgotten as professional instincts took over. "It's a big one, and we're directly in its path." Marcus leaned forward to check the sensor readings, his own training kicking in. "Can we navigate around it?" "Not with our current fuel reserves." Zephira's hands moved with practiced precision, adjusting their course and speed. We'll have to ride it out in the storm's eye. But first, we need to find shelter. The next 20 minutes were a testament to Zephyra's piloting skills. She guided the stellar drifter through increasingly dense fields of tumbling rock, some pieces larger than their entire ship. Marcus monitored the engines and deflector shields, calling out power fluctuations and impact warnings as they wove between cosmic debris. There, Zephyra pointed to a massive asteroid with a natural cave formation. We can anchor inside until the storm passes, the maneuver required, threading the needle between two spinning boulder fields, but Zephyra made it look effortless. The ship settled into the asteroid's hollow interior with a gentle thud, magnetic anchors securing them to the rocky wall's dot as the engines powered down to minimal levels. The storm raged outside their temporary shelter. Through the viewport, Marcus could see chunks of rock the size of buildings tumbling past in chaotic patterns, occasionally illuminated by the brief flare of smaller impacts. "We'll be here for at least 6 hours," Zephyra said, checking the storm's projected duration. She turned back to face him, her expression serious. "Which gives us plenty of time to talk." Marcus had known this moment would come eventually, but he'd hoped to choose the time and place himself. He stood and moved to the small observation window, watching the cosmic chaos outside. "My wife was a xenolinguist," he said quietly. "Elena. She specialized in non-humanoid communication systems." Zephyra's expression softened slightly. "Was? She died 3 years ago?" "Equipment failure during a deep space research mission." The words still came hard, even after all this time. "We worked together. I was her technical support specialist, but over the years, I became fascinated by her work." He turned back to face Zephyra, who had moved to sit on the edge of the navigation console, her crystalline hair catching the emergency lighting. "Elena was studying Valerian harmonic language patterns when she died." Marcus continued. "She'd theorized that with the right vocal modifications, humans might be able to approximate some of the simpler forms. After the accident, I couldn't let her research die with her. So you continued her work," Zephyra said, understanding beginning to dawn in her eyes. "I underwent surgical modification of my vocal cords and auditory processing centers. Spent 2 years learning everything I could about Valerian culture, language, and customs." Marcus's laugh held no humor. "Elena would have been fascinated by the irony that I finally mastered pronunciation of birthsong, names after she was gone." Zephyra was quiet for a long moment, processing this revelation. "That's why you became a mechanic? To run away from linguistics?" "Working with my hands helps," Marcus admitted. "Engines don't require emotional investment. They either work or they don't. But you kept the modifications. Reversing them would have meant letting go of the last connection I had to Elena's work." He met Zephyra's gaze. "Until today, I thought that's all they'd ever be." The ship shuddered as a particularly large piece of debris struck their shelter, sending vibrations through the hull. Zephyra glanced at the structural integrity readings, then back at Marcus. "You realize what you've done, don't you?" She asked softly. "The binding isn't just ceremonial. According to our laws, our souls are now connected." "I'm beginning to understand that," Marcus said. "What does it mean, exactly?" Zephyra slipped down from the console and moved closer to him. In the confined space of the cockpit, he became acutely aware of her presence. The way her skin seemed to glow with its own light, the subtle spice scent that surrounded her, the graceful way she moved despite the low gravity. "It means that until one of us dies, we're considered spiritually linked," she explained. "In traditional Valerian society, we would be expected to undergo the binding ceremony within 1 lunar cycle. And if we don't, the bond is considered incomplete, but not broken. We would both be marked as partially bound for the rest of our lives. No other Valerian would consider me as a potential partner." Marcus felt a weight settle in his chest. "Zephyra, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to trap you in anything. If there's a way to undo this—" "There isn't," she interrupted, but her tone wasn't angry. "And before you apologize again, you should know something." She reached out and placed her hand on his chest, directly over his heart. Through the thin fabric of his work shirt, her touch felt cool and somehow soothing. "I've been traveling with humans for 3 years," she said. "Working on cargo ships, mixing with your people. My family considers me already partially estranged from traditional Valerian society." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that maybe this isn't the disaster you think it is." Her eyes met his, and he saw something in them that made his breath catch. "When I made that joke about the binding law, part of me was curious what would happen if someone actually could pronounce my name." The ship's communication system suddenly crackled to life, startling them both. A familiar voice filled the cockpit, speaking in the melodic tones of Valerian standard. "Zephyra, this is Nexus aboard the merchant vessel Golden Horizon. We received your distress beacon and wanted to check on your status." Zephyra moved to the communication panel, her hand briefly brushing Marcus's arm as she passed. The simple contact sent an unexpected jolt through him. "Nexus, good to hear your voice," she replied in accented standard. "We're riding out the asteroid storm in shelter. No immediate danger." "Excellent. When you reach Helix Station, contact me. There's someone I want you to meet, a potential partner from the Andorian trade guilds." "Your family sent his credentials." Marcus watched Zephyra's face carefully as she absorbed this information. Her expression became carefully neutral, but he caught the slight tightening around her eyes. "I'll consider it," she replied diplomatically. "Safe travels, Nexus." After the communication ended, Zephyra stood with her back to Marcus for a long moment. Outside, the asteroid storm continued its violent dance, trapping them in their small sanctuary. "A potential partner," Marcus said quietly. "My family's idea of helping me settle down," Zephyra replied, still facing the communication panel. "They've been increasingly concerned about my wandering lifestyle. And now you're bound to a human mechanic instead." She turned back to him, and he was surprised to see something that might have been relief in her expression. "Yes," she said simply. "Now I am." The weight of implication settled between them. This wasn't just about ancient laws or cultural obligations anymore. Something was growing between them in the confined space of their shelter, something that had nothing to do with binding ceremonies and everything to do with the way she looked at him when she thought he wasn't watching. "Zephyra," Marcus said, stepping closer. "What happens now?" "Now we wait out the storm," she replied, but her voice had taken on a different quality, softer, more personal. "And we figure out what this binding means to us, not to our cultures." Outside, rocks the size of mountains tumbled through space in chaotic patterns. Inside their shelter, two beings from different worlds stood facing each other, connected by forces they were only beginning to understand. The storm would pass eventually, but Marcus was beginning to realize that what was happening between them might be permanent in ways that had nothing to do with ancient laws. Helix Station materialized ahead of them, like a glittering jewel against the black velvet of space. The massive orbital platform served as a neutral meeting ground for dozens of species, its rotating sections creating artificial gravity for those who needed it, while providing zero-G docking bays for others. As they approached the docking coordinates, Marcus found himself stealing glances at Zephyra, whose demeanor had grown increasingly tense since they'd emerged from the asteroid storm. "Bay 47, Zephyra announced, her voice carefully professional. "We'll be docked for 12 hours while Captain Thorne arranges the next cargo shipment." Marcus nodded, though his attention was divided between the docking procedure and the way. Zephyra's crystalline hair seemed to dim when she was worried. Over the past day, he'd begun noticing these subtle changes in her appearance that reflected her emotional state. Stellar Drifter settled into its berth with practiced precision. As the docking clamps engaged and the airlock sealed, Zephyra finally turned to face him fully. "Marcus, there's something you should know before we disembark," she said, her luminous eyes reflecting uncertainty. I sent a message to my family during our approach about the binding, and my grandmother is here. Elder Vithara arrived on a diplomatic transport 6 hours ago. Zephyra's skin shifted from its usual blue to a deeper purple, a sign of stress Marcus was beginning to recognize. She's demanding to meet you immediately. Before Marcus could respond, his personal communicator chimed. The caller ID made his stomach drop. Jake Reed, personal. My brother, he muttered, accepting the call. Jake's face appeared in the small holographic display, his expression a mixture of concern and exasperation that Marcus knew all too well. Marcus, what the hell is going on? Jake demanded without preamble. I got a call from Admiral Riggs saying you're involved in some kind of alien marriage situation. Gets complicated, Jake. Complicated? Jake's voice rose. You disappear for 3 years after Elena's death, reject every offer to return to xenolinguistics, and now you're bound to some alien pilot? This sounds like another one of your self-destructive decisions. Marcus felt Zephyra's eyes on him as his brother continued his tirade. Jake, I'm not 17 anymore. I can make my own choices. Can you? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're running away from life again, just in a different direction. The call ended abruptly, leaving an uncomfortable silence in the cockpit. Zephyra studied Marcus's face with those disconcertingly perceptive eyes. Your family doesn't approve, she observed. My family thinks I've been making poor decisions since Elena died, Marcus replied, powering down the ship's systems. They're not entirely wrong. And now they think I'm another poor decision. They don't know you, Marcus said firmly. That's the difference. As they prepared to disembark, Captain Thorne's gruff voice crackled over the intercom. Read, Zephyra. Report to the cargo bay. We've got customs inspection in 30 minutes. Then you're both off duty until tomorrow's departure. The cargo bay of the Stellar Drifter was cramped but functional, filled with sealed containers bound for the Outer Rim colonies. Captain Thorne, a weathered man in his 60s with cybernetic implants replacing his left eye and arm, stood reviewing manifest data on a portable display. Customs went smooth, he announced as they approached. Whatever you two did during that asteroid storm, it worked. Ship's running better than it has in months. He glanced between them, noting something different in their dynamic. You're both acting weird. What happened out there? Nothing, Captain, Zephyra replied smoothly. Just standard storm procedure. Thorne's cybernetic eye focused on her with mechanical precision. Hung. Well, whatever nothing was, sort it out before tomorrow. I don't need personal drama affecting my crew's performance. After Thorne departed, Marcus and Zephyra made their way through the station's bustling corridors. Helix Station was a microcosm of galactic civilization, with beings from dozens of species conducting business, socializing, and simply trying to coexist in the cramped environment. The artificial gravity varied from section to section, accommodating different physiological needs. The Valerian quarter is in Section C, Zephyra said as they navigated through a crowded marketplace. My grandmother will be in the diplomatic suites. Are you nervous? Marcus asked, noticing the continued purple tinge to her skin. Terrified, she admitted. Elder Vithara is ... traditional. She views my career choice as already borderline scandalous. A binding to a human will either fascinate her or horrify her. Possibly both. They found Elder Vithara in the station's diplomatic garden, a carefully maintained biodome that provided a touch of natural beauty in the sterile environment of space. She was seated beneath a synthetic tree whose leaves shifted through spectrum of colors, meditating or simply thinking. Marcus's first impression was of elegant age. Vithara's skin held the same iridescence as Zephyra's, but with a silvery quality that spoke of centuries of experience. Her crystalline hair had grown long enough to pool around her seated form like liquid starlight, And when she opened her eyes to regard them, Marcus felt as if he were being measured by someone who had seen the rise and fall of civilizations. "Granddaughter," Vithara said, rising with fluid grace. Her voice carried harmonics that made the words seem to resonate in Marcus's bones. "You look well, Elder Vithara," Zephira replied formally, bowing in a gesture that Marcus recognized as deeply respectful. "Thank you for coming." The older Valerian's attention turned to Marcus, and he felt the full weight of her scrutiny. "So, you are the human who spoke my granddaughter's birth song." "I am," Marcus replied, uncertain of the proper protocol, but meeting her gaze steadily. "Show me." It wasn't a request. Marcus glanced at Zephira, who nodded encouragingly, then sang her name as he had in the cockpit. The complex harmonics filled the small garden space, causing several nearby plants to vibrate sympathetically with the sound frequencies. When he finished, Vithara was silent for a long moment. "Remarkable," she finally said. "I have never heard a non-Valerian voice achieve such precision. You have been modified. Yes, for love of knowledge or love of profit." The directness of the question caught Marcus off guard. "For love," he said simply, "though not originally for your granddaughter." "Explain." Marcus found himself telling Vithara about Elena, about the research they had conducted together, about the modifications he had undergone to continue her work. The elder listened without interruption, her expression revealing nothing. "Your first mate died pursuing understanding of my people," Vithara said when he finished, "and you honored her memory by completing what she could not. I tried to, and in doing so, you bound yourself to my granddaughter." Vithara's eyes shifted to Zephira. "Tell me, child, do you believe this binding occurred by chance?" Zephira's skin flushed deeper purple. I'm not sure, grandmother." "I am," Vithara said with certainty. "The probability of a randomly modified human encountering a Valerian and being able to speak her birth song is astronomically small. Yet here you stand." She moved closer to Marcus, studying his face with ancient eyes. "Do you love her?" The question hung in the garden's artificial atmosphere. Marcus felt Zephira's attention focus on him with laser intensity. "I'm beginning to," he said honestly. "But we've only known each other for 6 months, and the binding happened yesterday. I'm not sure what I feel is love or just ... connection." "Honesty," Vithara said approvingly. "Rare among humans, from what I've observed." She turned to Zephira. "And you, granddaughter?" "I feel drawn to him," Zephira admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "More than I've felt toward anyone before. But I don't know if it's the binding influencing my emotions or genuine feeling." "An excellent question," came a new voice from the garden's entrance. Marcus turned to see a tall, lean man with graying temples and the bearing of someone accustomed to command. Jake Reed stood in the doorway, his expression carefully controlled. "Jake," Marcus said, tension immediately filling his voice. "Marcus." Jake's eyes moved to Zephira and Vithara, taking in the scene with military precision. "I apologize for interrupting, but I felt this conversation was too important to delay." "This is my brother, Jake," Marcus said reluctantly. "Jake, this is Zephira and her grandmother, Elder Vithara." Jake stepped forward, offering a slight bow that suggested familiarity with diplomatic protocol. "Elder, it's an honor." "Zephira, I've heard a great deal about you." "None of it good, I imagine," Zephira replied with surprising directness. "Actually, Captain Thorne speaks very highly of your piloting skills," Jake said, surprising them all. "He also mentioned that you've been good for Marcus." The first person to make him smile genuinely since Elena's death. Marcus stared at his brother in shock. "You spoke to Thorne?" "I speak to everyone, Marcus. It's what I do." Jake's expression softened slightly. "I was worried about you. When Admiral Riggs told me about this binding situation, My first thought was that you were making another impulsive decision based on grief. And now? Marcus asked warily. Jake studied both Marcus and Zephyra for a long moment. Now I'm wondering if maybe impulsive decisions aren't always wrong. He turned to Elder Vithara. Elder, what are the requirements for this binding to be considered complete? They must undergo the ceremony of soul joining within 1 lunar cycle, Vithara replied, or remain partially bound for life, unable to form complete romantic attachments with others. And if they complete the ceremony, they become permanently linked until death. Their life forces intertwined, their destinies shared. Jake nodded slowly. Marcus, can I speak with you privately? They moved to a quiet corner of the garden, while Zephyra remained with her grandmother. Marcus braced himself for another lecture, but Jake surprised him again. She's not Elena, Jake said quietly. I know that, do you? Because I've watched you turn every relationship, every job, every opportunity into a memorial for your dead wife for 3 years. I was afraid this was more of the same. Marcus felt anger flare. And what if it is? Then you'd be doing a disservice to both Elena's memory and that remarkable woman over there, Jake replied calmly. But I don't think it is anymore. What do you mean? I mean, the way you look at her isn't the way someone looks at a substitute or a shrine. It's the way someone looks at a person they're falling in love with. Jake placed a hand on Marcus's shoulder. The question is, are you brave enough to let yourself feel it? Across the garden, Marcus could see Zephyra in animated conversation with her grandmother, her skin cycling through various hues as she spoke. Even from a distance, he could see the intelligence in her gestures, the passion in her expression as she explained something complex. I think I already am, Marcus admitted quietly. Then stop overthinking it, Jake said. Elena wouldn't have wanted you to spend the rest of your life alone out of loyalty to her memory. She'd have wanted you to find love again. As if sensing his attention, Zephyra looked across the garden and met Marcus's eyes. Her skin shifted from purple to a warm golden hue, and she smiled, not the professional smile she used with clients or the teasing grin she deployed during their banter, but something softer and more genuine. The ceremony, Marcus said suddenly. What about it? If we're going to do this, we should do it properly. Not because we're trapped by ancient laws, but because we choose to. Jake squeezed his shoulder. Now that sounds like the brother I remember. As the artificial day cycle began to dim in the garden's biodome, Marcus walked back to where Zephyra waited with her grandmother. Whatever happened next, he was done running from the possibility of love.